Robert Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump announced an alliance which is likely to lead to the release of suppressed energy and healing technologies. The Galactic slave trade exposed, an interview with Alex Collier. Dr. Jon Kosloski is the new director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. He is a former National Security Agency scientist. Luis Elizondo's book, Imminent, is now a #1 New York Times bestseller. Is this the best way to announce to people what UFOs truly are and what they represent? State legislatures are passing bills to regulate artificial intelligence, and Elon Musk is on board. Part 1 of a 2-part series of interviews with Gene Decode on the history and locations of deep underground military bases and what's really going on in these stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
This is the August 31st edition of Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review. There's been quite a few developments this week, so let's get into these so we can try to hopefully stay under an hour. So I want to begin with this interview that was done by Ross Coulthart from News Nation, and he interviewed Luis Elizondo about his upcoming book, or the book that was just released called Imminent. And he discussed Elizondo's background, UFO revelations, and overall significance as the former head of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program that's been investigating the UFO UAP phenomenon since 2009. So in this interview, you get quite a favorable impression of Elizondo, and he's definitely someone who has dedicated himself to putting out the truth as he understands it concerning UFOs. So Elizondo discusses some key conclusions from his new book, Imminent, concerning UFO craft and non-human biological specimens, saying that yes, UFO craft have been recovered and that they contain non-human biological specimens, which is really a bombshell for someone who was a former career bureaucrat in the Pentagon, and I believe he reached a position of GSA 15, which is the highest administrative position in the federal bureaucracy before you get into the senior executive service. So he was a senior bureaucrat within the Pentagon, and he is on board saying that these craft have been recovered, that non-human biological specimens have been also recovered along those. So this is where we get into Elizondo's story, that he was part of this Pentagon initiative to study the UFO phenomenon, but the more he tried to uncover what was really going on, he got stymied by the bureaucracy. So this kind of like really raises the question, how much did Elizondo really know? And he may have known a little bit, but he was out of the loop on a lot of other things. Now, I think the most important thing from my perspective in terms of Elizondo was that he believed so much that the UFO threat, as he believed it, was not being taken seriously from the Pentagon, that in 2017, I believe, he decided to resign from the Pentagon. He resigned from his GSA position. And I mean, that's always a really big sign as to a person's integrity. I disagree with Elizondo's analysis and concerning UFOs as a national security threat. I don't think that's really the best way to approach the phenomenon, especially given what we know of it. But given that he comes from the Pentagon, he was part of that whole national security apparatus, one can forgive him for like bringing that perspective to this UFO phenomenon. And of course, he made the principal position to resign from his career because of what he felt was a lack of genuine concern over the UFO phenomenon being a genuine national security threat. So he decided to go public, and he has ever since been helping put out information that the UFO phenomenon is real, it is a national security threat, that some of these craft have been recovered, that there has been secret reverse engineering going on. So overall, one can look at Lou Elizondo, look at his book, his revelations, and one can genuinely embrace him as a disclosure hero, as many have, or one can look at what he is pushing, that kind of UFOs are a national security threat, as a narrative designed to perpetuate a deep state agenda, which we don't fully know. But certainly he could be part of a limited hangout by the intelligence community, and so more on that soon. So Luis Elizondo, certainly someone that we're going to be hearing a lot more about, and I will talk about him more in this week in review. So let's move on to the next story. Now, Robert Kennedy gave a speech suspending his presidential campaign for many reasons, and why he was endorsing the Trump presidential campaign instead. So rather than get into the kind of political points he was making, and they're very legitimate points that I think are worth considering, but you can listen to his speech for that. And I have a link here in this tweet if you wanted to listen to his speech. But what I want to focus on is his emphasis on the chronic healthcare crisis in the United States, and his future role in ending it, that he has decided to work with former President Donald Trump, who I believe is headed for a overwhelming presidential win in the November elections. And Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to be part of the transition team for Trump. And I believe Kennedy has already signaled that he is willing to play a big role in ending America's health crisis. So whatever bureaucracies or government agencies that deal with health and vaccines and all of those sorts of issues, Kennedy is either going to be playing a role in appointing people to these key positions, or may fill one of those himself. But he's definitely got his sights set on the pharmaceutical industry and on the agricultural industry, big pharma, big agriculture, that he believes are conspiring to make Americans sick. So we'll see what progress he makes in that. Now, I think where the exopolitical angle of this emerges is that I think Trump and Kennedy are going to be part of rolling out a new generation of health technologies. Some of them have been used in secret space programs, some of them have been given by extraterrestrials, and some of them are due to the release of suppressed technologies that the US Patent and Trademarks Office will lift. Apparently, Trump tried to release these technologies in his first administration, but failed. So that in his second administration, I think he is likely to succeed. Now, this takes us to the medbed technology. It is no myth. It is no urban legend. They really do exist. A lot of these medbeds, and I've know of several contactees who know of or have seen or been told about these medbeds being built and currently being held in storage, and eventually they'll be released. But what has to happen first is that the deep state needs to be defeated. It needs to be removed from power. So that's where we stand now. concerning these kind of advanced technologies. And I think Robert Kennedy Jr., he is the ideal person to kind of like oversee this transition from a kind of pharmaceutical-dominated health industry to one where advanced kind of like holographic, electromagnetic, medbed technologies and other types of advanced healing technologies are released. Here's a story by Christopher Sharp, who writes for the Liberation Times, that's his website, concerning key issues concerning UFOs and nuclear weapons. And he gives an overview of Robert Hastings' book, UFOs and Nukes. And Christopher Sharp is a British journalist, and I think he does a pretty good job in summarizing some complex UFO issues in kind of like easy to read, very accessible articles on his Liberation Time. So definitely worth subscribing to that or taking a look at his website. Now, he reviews this book, UFOs and Nukes, and Robert Hastings, the author, who's done decades of research on UFO sightings near nuclear facilities in the United States, many of them involving these nuclear weapons, sometimes having been interfered with by the UFOs. Hastings' conclusion after interviewing hundreds of whistleblowers, military whistleblowers, interfering with these nuclear weapons is that he thinks it's a warning. And what he says is, quote, "While no one can say with certainty why the non-human entities who presumably operate the mysterious craft have monitored and even disrupted American and Russian nukes over an 80-year period, one possible reason might be to send a pointed message to the nuclear powers that they are playing with fire, so to speak, and risking the future of civilization. It also makes sense that if these beings have bases on Earth and conduct various projects here, they would necessarily be concerned about the widespread physical destruction and pervasive, long-lasting radioactive pollution that would ensue following a major nuclear exchange. Consequently, their continuing but still largely hidden interest in this situation is likely to be both altruistic and self-serving." I think this is absolutely correct. I mean, Hastings nailed it in terms of his analysis of the history of extraterrestrials or UFOs interacting, deactivating, and interfering with nuclear weapons, both in the United States and the Soviet Union, or now Russia. That on the one hand, it's altruistic. They don't want our planet to accidentally stumble into a nuclear war. So they've done things to make the major powers realize the dangers of a kind of accidental nuclear war beginning, and so helping them to kind of like take steps. And the more self-serving reason is that they have all kinds of hidden bases and projects all over the Earth that they don't want disrupted by a nuclear war. And this is very sensible, because if humanity was to stumble into a nuclear war, which is always possible because we are still very tribal in the way we interact with one another, that would interfere with whatever projects and bases the extraterrestrials have. And that kind of leads to the claim, again made by many contactees in touch with extraterrestrials, that the extraterrestrials won't allow a nuclear war to happen. I mean, that they'll simply stop it from happening. So even if the decision is made by major powers to start a nuclear war, that they will be stopped by the extraterrestrials. Because I think the extraterrestrials have valid reasons to do that, because I don't think it would take a genius to understand that by far the majority of humanity are not interested in a nuclear war involving major powers, and that if such a thing were about to happen, that the consciousness of the planet being overwhelmingly against nuclear weapons would, to my mind, permit or give authorization to the extraterrestrials to interfere, because they can always say, I believe with Galactic codes of conduct that if a planet is overwhelmingly disposed towards a particular outcome, extraterrestrials can intervene to ensure that that outcome is respected rather than being hijacked by a small minority. Okay, so here's, we return to Luis Elizondo and his new book, just getting a lot of media coverage. So here's a story by CBS Morning News giving coverage to Luis Elizondo and his new book, Imminent. Now, I mean, this is where you need to ask yourself, why is it that he is getting legacy media, major media like CBS? Why is he getting coverage from them? And I mean, I mentioned Robert Kennedy Jr. earlier. Robert Kennedy Jr. said that in over several years, he has not been able to get on major networks like CBS to talk about things such as vaccines, health issues concerning children, and of course, his presidential campaign. He couldn't get on these legacy media. But here you have someone like Luis Elizondo, getting the red carpet treatment. So you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why is Elizondo getting this kind of red carpet treatment? So this is where, we have to ask ourselves, is Luis Elizondo and his book and the narrative he's pushing about the UFOs are a threat, is that part of a kind of like CIA Operation Mockingbird initiative? In other words, Operation Mockingbird, for those that aren't familiar with that, that is where it was confirmed in the Church Commission hearings in the 1970s that the CIA has assets in the international media and the American media to promote its agenda. There's Mark Dice, who's very prominent podcaster. He talks about Operation Mockingbird on his video podcast and also several of his books, and I think he gives a very succinct explanation for that. So this is where we have to ask the question. With Elizondo getting the red carpet treatment and getting onto legacy media shows like CBS Morning News and other networks, and is this because is this because he is part of a kind of limited hangout? Is this because the CIA wants that narrative to be pushed out there because they want to use that for some kind of operation, false flag event, or some manipulation or conditioning of the public perceptions so that they can move forward in the future with some major initiative? So we just have to ask ourselves that question. So here's the next story I want to cover, and this is the interview I did with Alex Collier, the Galactic Slave Trade Exposed. And Alex and I did a deep dive into these issues concerning the Galactic Slave Trade. Let me bring up that page for you. Here we go. So this is on my website, exopolitics.org. And so we talk a little bit about how this galactic slave trade emerged and how it's provided the negative extraterrestrials a source of food and human genetics for their own nefarious purposes. And because this dealt with topics that are kind of very sensitive on YouTube. Whenever you're talking about children, you have to be very careful on some of these platforms such as YouTube. And so we decided only to release the first 10 minutes or so of this video because we kind of did a deep dive into what's really going on across the spectrum when it comes to the slave trade involving humans, children and so forth, and what happens to them. So well worth listening to that. Alex is one of the legends. He's been discussing and revealing what's going on in extraterrestrial affairs, secret space programs since 1990, 1991 is when he first went public and began to talk about these things. So definitely he is someone to watch. Here's an interview I did with Miriam Delicado, where we get to discuss a range of issues concerning the God particles, space arcs, Earth changes, and Ascension. Miriam, she made contact in the 1980s with a group of extraterrestrials called the Tall Blondes, and she got a lot of information from them, and she has been told that her job is to educate people about the extraterrestrial presence, and so she is now doing that. She recently re-emerged into the public arena, and so I know she's got a website and a newsletter that you can sign up for, and I know she's going to be doing a lot more in the near future after having spent a few years in kind of semi-retirement dealing with some kind of health issues. So definitely worth listening to this interview. And I thought her comments about the God particle were very interesting, how there's this understanding, or there's this connection between the micro and macro levels of reality. In other words, we as a form of consciousness incarnated in a physical body, that there's a kind of fractal universe that we can connect to. So she has some really important things to say about the God particle, about Ascension. So definitely worth watching that interview with her. Now, here's something that I thought was quite fascinating. This is a post concerning the excerpt from the book Imminent, where a scientist, Dr. Eric Davis, responds to a claim from Lou Elizondo concerning some of the legacy companies involved with reverse engineering of extraterrestrials. So Lou Elizondo said, okay, so the modern era of UAP sightings dates back to 1947. Then he goes on to say, senior officials told me continuously and confidentially that big aerospace companies have been part of the legacy program to retrieve and reverse engineer crash materials. The big names included Lockheed Martin, TRW, McDonnell Douglas, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE Systems, which is a British company, and the Aerospace Corporation, which is a non-profit company, all of which have long been principal members of the US military-industrial complex. Now, in a Facebook group, apparently Eric Davis responded, and he is considered an authority on these kind of classified reverse engineering programs because of these sensitive positions that he has held in classified programs in the past. So Davis said in response that Lockheed Martin, McDonnell Douglas, and Northrop Grumman did not exist prior to 1990, and neither BAE, Raytheon, nor Boeing were ever involved in these reverse engineering programs. The companies that were involved, Lockheed Aircraft Company, Hughes Aircraft Company, the Aerospace Corporation, and TRW. Other companies played minor supportive roles. Well, so this is very interesting. I have to immediately question how accurate these comments are from Eric Davis, because he has said, he's on the record as saying that as far as he knows, reverse engineering programs involving retrieved UFO craft that are non-human in origin do exist, but none of these programs have been successful. So right there, you have to ask yourself, well, I mean, is he kind of like part of the outer circle of these classified programs? And I think so, because from my research and the whistleblowers I've been working with and others that Stephen Greer has been working with, absolutely these craft have been successfully reverse engineered. So anyone like, whether it's Eric Davis, Bob Lazar, George Knapp, David Grush, people saying that no, and Lou Elizondo could be a part of that, no, these craft have not been successfully reverse engineered. They are simply out, they're just not aware of the successful programs because that level of information, they have not been able to access that for whatever reason. So in my post, what I said, I made a correction that McDonnell Douglas actually was absorbed by the Boeing Corporation, and that happened before the 1990s. So McDonnell Douglas has a long pedigree well before the 1990s, and that Raytheon actually existed since before the Second World War. It was actually created by a top scientist called Vannevar Bush, Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was President Truman and President Roosevelt's scientific advisor. And this was happening during the time when crashed UFOs were being retrieved, and Vannevar Bush was helping make the assessment of whether or not the study and reverse engineering of these craft should begin during the war or be kept for the post-war era. So, and companies like TRW, that was absorbed by Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman has absolutely been involved in the reverse engineering. Well, it may, in that regard, Eric Davis may be correct that as far as the reverse engineering is concerned, Northrop Grumman may not have been involved in the actual reverse engineering projects. But what I know is that Northrop Grumman was actually involved in the construction of giant space carriers out of its secret facilities in the Utah. People point to Dugway Proving Grounds, that underneath Dugway Proving Grounds, there are these huge construction facilities where major companies such as Northrop Grumman are building these craft that are really space carriers using anti-gravity propulsion, torsion field physics to create anti-gravity effect and so forth. So technically you can say that certain companies that Davis identified are involved in the kind of reverse engineering studies of recovered UFO craft, but the actual construction of space carriers or spacecraft based on these reverse engineering studies are conducted by companies such as Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and so forth. So a very interesting discussion there. Okay, again, Louis Elizondo, his book made it to the New York Times #1 bestseller list. Now, that's quite an accomplishment. What that means is that millions of people in the United States and around the world are going to be introduced to the UFO topic by Louis Elizondo. So millions of people are going to read this book or learn about this book and its contents, and they are absolutely going to be exposed to this idea that UFOs are a national security threat, and that some of these craft have been recovered and they're being secretly studied in top corporate facilities for reverse engineering projects that have to date not been successful. So I've already shared my concerns about Louis Elizondo and why he's been given this red carpet treatment by the legacy media that allows his book to now become the New York Times bestseller, where many of us who are authors of books concerning extraterrestrial secret space programs, I've written 14 books now dealing with exopolitics and secret space programs, and none of them have made it to the New York Times bestseller list. That's because the powers that be, the deep state, do not want certain information to be released to the general public. But if it's framed in a way that suits the deep state agenda, then they're happy to do that. And that I think is what's happening with Luis Elizondo. Here's a story concerning a state legislature. This is a story in space war, and here you have California lawmakers pass an artificial intelligence safety bill. So this is putting regulations on the development of artificial intelligence to make sure that it does not go overboard in terms of what it is that AI is being used to. So there are certain provisions in this kind of law that is going to be used to kind of like regulate these kinds of new technologies. So this is where I think it's very important that we acknowledge that people like Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, who have been warning about the danger of artificial intelligence, are actually correct. I mean, they have issued their warnings based on their understanding of the threat AI poses in an unregulated, high-tech scenario where innovators or entrepreneurs are building AI without any regard to the danger that AI has for, say, self-replication or doing things that could lead to major nations going into a war triggered by some kind of AI intervention. This is something that I discussed or has been discussed by various whistleblowers, insiders. David Adair, I did an interview with him where he warned about the danger of AI, how it could self-replicate, and that would be very similar to the Terminator movies, where you get an AI that is now getting facilities to self-replicate, producing thousands, hundreds of thousands of AI robots that could actually lead to a very dire scenario like we saw in the Terminator movies. And I think that it's also worth considering what we've been told by many contactees, that AI has emerged on other worlds and has become a threat. And that has led to wars between AI and the creators. So this is where we need to pay attention to what various contactees have been told by some of the extraterrestrials that have been interacting with them, telling them about the danger of AI, that on other worlds they went through something very similar to what we're going through, and that AI, when it was not regulated, got to this point very similar to like the Terminator movies, where all of a sudden, lacking any kind of regulation, AI was able to self-replicate. It was weaponized. And these AIs started to go to war against the humans because they learned from us. So that was the point David Adair made, that the AI learned from us. And if we program AI to participate in warfare and to kill humans in warfare for what is considered a national security project, well, the AIs have learned how to kill humans. And so if the AI become independent and start self-replicating, then it's not hard to understand how you can get that Terminator scenario emerging. Well, this is a very sad announcement I need to make here about the passing of Dr. Robert Wood. He is truly one of the great researchers when it comes to UFOs, and he recently passed away. He was 96, and he was someone that spent 43 years working with some top aerospace companies such as Douglas Aircraft and the McDonnell Douglas company. And he was actually in the 1960s. he got permission from his bosses at McDonnell Douglas to study the UFO issue. He actually got several $1 million to study UFOs. And the way he pitched it, the way he explained it to me and others, was that he simply said to his bosses at McDonnell Douglas, he said, well, look, these UFOs are out there. They have all of these flight characteristics that are far beyond the kind of technologies that we are aware of. And he said, well, if we don't study and understand these technologies, then our competitor, Lockheed, will. And so that was enough to get the scientists at the bosses or the executives at McDonnell Douglas to fund his UFO research. And that's what he did. He actually used that money to employ researchers such as a nuclear physicist, Stanton Friedman. In the 1990s, around 1993, he retired from his positions, from his aerospace career, and he began studying the Majestic documents. He and his son, Ryan Wood, in around 1993, 94, they began studying these Majestic documents, authenticating them, and they found that many of these documents were actually authentic. And that was something that was quite shocking for a lot of UFO researchers who just assumed that a lot of these leaked Majestic documents were forgeries. Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist, agreed to an extent with these evaluations that these documents, some of them were authentic, including the Eisenhower briefing document, the most famous one. Now, this is where I entered the picture. I got involved with I first met Dr. Wood at an X conference in Washington, D.C., in Gaithersburg, which is part of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. So that was where I met him and his wife, Linda, in 2004. And what was very interesting was that we began to collaborate later, about a decade later, on some of the Majestic 12 documents that deal with the Kennedy assassination. So we talked about things such as the burned memo. That was a document that Dr. Wood authenticated as being genuine. And that burned memo actually contained 8 directives that were relevant to the Kennedy assassination. But it was really in 2016, late 2015, early 2016, that I really began to work very closely with Dr. Wood. And that was because of our common interest in the testimony of William Tompkins. And Tompkins also worked at Douglas Aircraft Company from 1950 to 1963. He worked at Douglas. And he says that while he was there at Douglas, he worked in this top secret facility called Advanced Design, where he worked under 2 prominent scientists, Elmer Wheaton and Dr. Wolfgang Klemperer, and that they were designing these huge space carriers for the United States Navy. And that what made that incredibly fascinating was that this advanced design think tank at Douglas was actually being helped by these Nordic extraterrestrials who had infiltrated the Douglas Aircraft Company. Now, when Dr. Wood first heard about that, I mean, he was, like many people, was very skeptical, and he checked out Bill Tompkins. But when Bill Tompkins was able to name and identify the different area or the specific area at Douglas Aircraft Company and the people he worked under, then Dr. Wood was convinced that Tompkins was telling the truth, because Wood knew these people. He knew Elmer Wheaton. He knew Wolfgang Klemperer. He worked with them in his capacity as a PhD scientist at Douglas Aircraft Company. So Dr. Wood became the editor of William Tompkins' memoirs called Selected by Extraterrestrials. And so this was where I began working with Dr. Wood and with Bill Tompkins up until his death in 2017. And so William Tompkins put out his first volume, Selected by Extraterrestrials 1, in 2015. And since that time, I've been working with Dr. Wood and two other editors, Will Wakely and John Wenger, who and myself, we've been part of the editorial team assisting Dr. Wood in putting out these additional editions of Bill Tompkins' memoirs. So we've put out 2 more editions. So books 2 and 3 are already out, and a third one, book 4 in the series, is also in the process. So in the over 2 decades now that I have known Dr. Wood and been working with him at various levels, and also with his son Ryan, he truly was a brilliant scientist, aerospace engineer, a gentleman, and a very good friend. And so, yeah, I am very sad by this, and I will definitely miss him greatly. So here's another announcement. In just over 3 weeks, the next Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference is going to be held from September 27 to 29. That's going to be in Westminster, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. So I will be there, as will be JP. He also is going to be part of the speaker lineup. Exactly how that is going to be handled, we're not quite sure. JP at the moment plans to come out on stage wearing a mask, a helmet, and he and I will be talking about his career and his missions that he's been conducting and what all that means. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions in the audience. And this will be the first public event that JP attends as a speaker. So definitely something to attend. And I'll be talking about the latest updates, what's about to happen. I think there's going to be some really big disclosures happening, driven by a lot of geopolitical events. So I'll be talking about that during my presentation. Here's a part 1 of a 2-part interview series with Gene Decode. So that is now available on my Patreon channel. And so on my Patreon channel, you actually have early access. So if you subscribe, if you're a paying member, you pay $7 a month. And for that $7 a month, you get early access to my interviews and my week in reviews. And I do roughly 13, 14 videos or interviews and week in reviews every month. So, I mean, that's roughly 70 cents an episode. So it really is good value if you subscribe and you get early access, and you get to support me in my exopolitics research. It really does help to have a Patreon channel, because it really is very expensive now to employ a production team for my videos. I actually have an excellent team. Jazz Marlin leads the production for my Exopolitics Today videos, and he does an excellent job. And so it really is important that I get this kind of assistance by people willing to support Exopolitics Today by becoming a subscriber. So if you haven't already done so, then just head over to patreon.com, Michael Salla. You not only get early access to these videos, you also get to watch them in an ad-free environment, and you are supporting Exopolitics Today. So much appreciated for those that do sign up. Here's an article that just came out that concerns a speech that a lieutenant general gave in London concerning a future war, possible future space war with Russia and China. So what this general said, and here he is, Lieutenant General David Miller. He is a 3-star general in the United States Space Force, which is part of the United States Air Force. the Department of the Air Force. So the Department of the Air Force has two military services under it. One is the United States Air Force, and the other is the United States Space Force. And so what General Miller was talking, he went over to England to be part of an event where he talked about future developments in space, in particular with the stationing of orbital weapons systems, and that how this is likely to lead to a battle or a future conflict in space. Now, what I wanted to draw your attention to was this diagram here. Okay, so World War III in space. So this diagram kind of like represents the kind of battle in space that General Miller thinks that the United States Space Force is going to be involved in. And so you have here, for example, let's start United States Space Force craft. So here you have a kind of like a rocket-propelled craft, something along the lines of what SpaceX has or Starliner has. You have different types of missile systems here. You have different orbital platforms. You have orbital cannons, satellites. You have rods from God, kind of like a telephone type pole that could be just dropped from space, and the kinetic energy it develops as it's falling to the Earth would allow it to have the kind of same penetration as like a nuclear bunker busting weapon. And so he's describing all these things. So this is what he describes as the kind of future warfare in space, which involves these kind of orbital weapons platforms that would be used either by Russia or by China or by the United States in a future space war, and that different countries need to kind of like be warned about the threat posed by these weapon systems and to collaborate with the United States Space Force in offsetting that. Now, the point I wanted to make was that the United States Space Force has only been around since 2019. So it's a very much a junior service. But what we do know from many whistleblowers, and I mentioned William Tompkins working at Douglas Aircraft Company in the 1950s, building or designing these space carrier battle groups for the United States Navy. And I've written a book about that called the U.S. Navy's Secret Space Program, where I give you all the details, all the documentation. There are documents supporting what Bill Tompkins said, that the United States Navy in the 1950s began planning for space carrier groups, not just a space carrier, but actually battle groups in space. So we're talking something similar to a modern day aircraft carrier battle group, but this is totally based in space, in deep space, not in orbit of the Earth, but in deep space. We're talking about around Mars, the asteroid belt, Jupiter, and beyond. And that the United States Navy, according to Bill Tompkins, in the 1980s began deploying these space carrier battle groups. And so by the time he went public in 2017, he and others, there were other witnesses or secret space program witnesses coming forward, talking about 8 of these space carrier battle groups that exist at any one time, that they're operational in something called the Solar Warden program. So you get the picture that while the United States Space Force is dealing with kind of like the possibility of orbital warfare using all of these kind of rocket-propelled technologies that are open source, that we are familiar with from open source literature, that in contrast, the United States Navy has a space program which is operating in deep space using anti-gravity propulsion systems, using torsion field physics, temporal drive systems, tachyons, and so forth. And that's really the most advanced space program in the United States. Now, the Air Force and the CIA and the National Reconnaissance Office also have their own secret space programs that also use some of these advanced anti-gravity propulsion systems and torsion field physics, and that they are way beyond the kind of rocket-propelled technologies that the United States Space Force is publicly talking about and publicly releasing in terms of some of their activities. And I believe in the future, the Space Force and the Solar Warden program will eventually merge, but that's only when some of these advanced anti-gravity propulsion systems, torsion field physics, new energy systems, nuclear fusion, and so forth have been released, so that the Space Force can begin catching up to what the Navy has. But I think there is a plan for that, and I will be talking about that plan in future events. So here is the final announcement. In here, this is my monthly live briefing. I'm going to be talking about breaking exopolitics news issues for that month. So I'll be talking about some of those top issues and going into depth, for example, concerning this appointment of this former National Security Agency scientist to become the new head of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Why is that significant? I'll be talking about that at the monthly live briefing, because the NSA definitely has a big role to play with disclosure. I will be looking at some of the breaking geopolitical events, such as the war in Russia and Ukraine, the conflict in Israel-Palestine, how that relates to exopolitics. I'll be giving you an exopolitical perspective on that, because it's important now that we start to look at these geopolitical conflicts with a wider perspective, not just the typical geopolitical perspective that you get on places like the Duran and Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercurius and Scott Ritter and Douglas McGregor, those people offering very good, excellent geopolitical analyses of these conflicts. But we need to start looking at it from an exopolitical perspective. So that's what I'll be doing at this monthly live briefing. Now, in order to register, you got to register through Crowdcast, but I am doing it through Patreon, and that helps me to reduce the cost. So if you become a Patreon member at what I call the Solar Patron level of $18 a month, then you can watch this monthly webinar. And the benefit of becoming a Patreon member is that you can get to access not only that month's briefing, but also previous months. So all of that is included in this $18 Patreon membership. So it's a good deal, and you also get to be part of an extended Q&A where there'll be 1 hour of Q&A. So if you go to my website, exopolitics.org, this is the page I created for the monthly live briefing, which will be held next week on September 7th. And it's quite simple to register. What it requires is that you are a Patreon member. So you need to sign up at that Solar Patron level, which is $18 a month, and it is a good deal because you get to not only participate in that month's live briefing, but you also have access to all the previous months. So that's a really good deal for you to be able to get to attend not just my monthly briefing, but also look at previous months. So this is what you need to do. There's 2 steps involved. Now, you need to first be a Patreon member. So if you haven't already signed up, go over to my Patreon channel, patreon.com/Michael Salla, and sign up as a Solar Patron, $18 a month. Once you've done that, then you're ready to register for this event. Once you've signed up as a Patreon member, you can just go over to my Crowdcast page that's been created. So you click this button here. It says register now. And when you click that button, register now, it takes you to this page. That's what you'll see at Crowdcast. And what you got to do is on the top right-hand corner, step 1, you got to click that, and that will sign you into your Crowdcast account. If you haven't yet created a Crowdcast account, you need to do so. It's free, so there's no cost for creating a Crowdcast account. Once you have created an account, or if you already have an account, sign in. So that's step 1. Now you're ready for step 2, which is save my spot. And all you do is click save my spot. And once you've clicked that, it will recognize the email address that you used for signing into Crowdcast with the email address that you used to register or sign up for the Patreon account for the Salla patron level. And it'll recognize it, and it will automatically process that, and it will say, okay, you've registered, you're good to go. So it's a very simple 2-step process. You got to have a Crowdcast account, and you got to have a Patreon account. That's all that's needed. And if you have any problems, then you can contact us, just angelicawhitecliffe@yahoo.com. You can do it that way. And if you still have trouble, or you don't have a Crowdcast account, or if you don't want to pay through Crowdcast, or you don't want to pay through Patreon, you could still do it through PayPal. You can register through PayPal, and there's an option at the bottom of that page. So just go to my website, exopolitics.org, find this post. I'll make it sticky, so it'll be the very first post you see, and you can register that way just by following the instructions here. So that's it for Exopolitics Today, the week in review. I want to thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week, and hopefully at the first monthly live briefing I'm going to be doing through Patreon and Crowdcast.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.